My name is Tom Gerard. I am the interviewer and a volunteer with the Biddeford Cultural and Heritage Center. It is Wednesday, October 9th. Today I have the privilege of interviewing Renee O'Neill. We are conducting this interview at Renee's work office in Biddeford. Hi Renee. I'd like to start by asking you when and where were you born?
Hi, Tom. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be a part of this interview. I was born in Burlington, Vermont in 1962.
And you remember what hospital it was up there?
It was the large, my dad was affiliated with the VA, so there was a hospital there. I don't know which one it was. I think it was something Memorial Hospital.
Yeah.
My brother, Chico, was also born there, and then my parents decided to move on from Vermont from there, but they were traveling a lot at that time.
All right, so before we talk about how you ended up in Vermont, or your parents did, what about your ancestry? What do you know about where your parents came from, or, their ancestors?
Yeah, so I've done a little bit of digging to see where my great-parents were born and my great-grandparents, and some of it I'm still working on. On my father's side, my dad's grandfather was named Dorsety Potvin. He was born in Canada, and he married Marguerite Landry, and she was born in Maine. And her family, I think, goes definitely back to Canada. They were both in the Dixfield area and moved to Lewiston, and that's where they had my grandfather, Pearlie. Pearlie looks like he had a brother, Alec, we think. We say that because we're unable to find the specific documentation about him. They lived in the Lewiston area for a while, and they didn't have much money, and I think like a lot of people during that time, if they didn't have money, they would sometimes have to live on what was called a poor farm, or their kids were pushed off to places like that. And the story in my family is that my grandfather and his brother ran away from an orphanage, but we really don't know if they were truly in an orphanage or not. Somehow they made it to Biddeford, and that's where he met my grandmother. My grandmother's name was Laurette Leonie Pillardi, and her father was Moises Pillardi from Canada. Her mother was Clara Esther Cantra, and she was born in Biddeford. And we are making the assumption that the Cantras also came from Canada. What is interesting is our connection with Susan DeChambeau, who you interviewed her not long ago. Susan's grandmother was Henriette DeChambeau, and she was my grandmother's sister. So Henriette was a Pillardi who married Clement DeChambeau, and that's how we're connected to Sue. My dad enjoyed Sue's grandfather and father very much, and the Pillardis were a lot of fun. We had a lot of aunts and uncles that we'd get together with, and that's one of the groups we would socialize with. My dad had a brother, Albert, and sisters, Margaret Goodson and Bernie Valier, and they were all, I think, born in Biddeford and went to school in Biddeford. Now on my mother's side, my mom was a Cody. Her name was Doris Claire Cody, and she had no brothers or sisters. My mom's father was Oneida Joseph Leo Cody, and everyone called him Leo. He was born in Canada. My grandmother was Laurence Anne Morel, and she was also born in Canada. Her brother Adolphe had a son, Michael, who was involved in banking, and a daughter, Rachel, who is married to Dick Rennie, who used to work for Rennie's store here in Biddeford. Also, this ties into my mom's cousins, who are Claudette Levesque, Rita Parsons, and Claire Leclerc. And their dad was my grandmother's brother, Ovilo. And Ovilo was also known as Chester, and he was one of the oldest employed workers at the mills.
Mike Morrell also taught at St. Louis High School a couple of years.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Wow.
He was teaching there when they closed, I'm quite sure.
Yeah, we miss him. He was he had a great sense of humor. My mom would always tell the story. My mom was about 10 years older than Mike, and she used to babysit him sometime. And she said that Mike used to bring her a comic book and say, "Doris, can you play the piano? Can you play this on the piano?" And my mother would make believe that she was playing the comic book was her was her musical score on the piano. So it was quite the character. And later on, I got to be on a board of directors for St. Andre's with Michael and worked with him on other projects. Going back to my mother's father, Leo, so his parents were Joseph Cody and Clarinda Beauchesne. And what was interesting about my great-grandmother Clarinda is my grandfather, somehow how there are stories about people of, they'll say, well, we have some, they used to say, Indian descent or Native American descent. Well, I can't prove it. I've been looking at our DNA, looking at some other things. I can't prove it. But one of the things that my grandfather was asked to do is if people in the community had an accident where they got a burn and were suffering from the pain of the burn, they would call on my grandfather, and my grandfather would have these prayers, or he used to say, I'm talking to the devil right now, because it must have been probably outside of something, was a different type of spiritual prayer. And he did not really like doing them, but I heard he was very successful. So the people that he attended to were provided relief from the pain. He never really wanted to pass that along. Not sure what that was, but it was basically a story we would hear from him. My grandmother and my mother would talk about it. So that was kind of a little bit of an interesting tidbit that I just thought of not long ago. But my grandfather's side, they all came from Canada, and they would go back and forth between Canada and Biddeford, and some actually of the Codys went to Lowell, Mass, and worked in the factories there. And finally my grandfather said, I'm not moving back to Canada anymore, we're staying here. And my grandfather and my grandmother decided to move to Biddeford. They actually lived on Green Street with Mike Morell's family, and all the Morells had a 3-story apartment building on Green Street in back of Leverrier's Market, and they all lived there for a while. And then my grandmother's father, Evariste Morell, he was a carpenter, and he built the house that is on Birch Street right now that my grandparents lived in. So my grandfather and my great-grandfather together built that little house. Evariste Morell was a carpenter, but he was first a dairy farmer. So in Canada, he had a dairy farm, and I found pamphlets that you had to, if you have a dairy farm and you made cheese or anything like that, you were in a book that was you were registered with whatever province you were in Canada. So that was kind of interesting. And my great-grandmother, Evariste's wife, was Clara Brouillard. And I think her ancestry goes all the way back to royalty in terms of there was some work that was done a long time ago by relatives to go back far enough to tie her in. And so I'm trying to find if that's really true or not, and what does royalty mean, right? So that's kind of interesting. But she passed away when she was about 58, and then my great-grandfather remarried a woman. Her name was Caroline de Wilder, and I think she was Belgian. So, but she's not blood, there's no blood relation, but she was I think she was like a cook on a steamship and was very versed in fine cuisine, and passed along a lot of really good cooking skills to actually my grandmother and some of I think that came down to myself and to my mom and to my even one of my brothers enjoys cooking too. So it was definitely, that's I think how we were brought into all of that from her. But that's really, the lineage comes primarily, most recently, the generations are in Maine, Canada, but somewhere we discovered that we're about 20% Portuguese. When I did my DNA, we don't really know where that has come from yet either, which is interesting, but the Potvin line goes all the way back to Normandy, France. So that line is likely, all French from what I can see. My mother's side, they did talk about having some English as well. So there's a little bit of a mix there.
Now, when you were growing up, did your family make any pilgrimages to Canada? Like a lot of Franco-American descent people in Biddeford used to do that, go visit family.
Yes. So we did not as kids. I did not go to Canada until like an 8th grade field trip, but my grandparents would go often. And one of the things, we knew that they went when they would come back, and we would get a bag of cheese curds that would come from the dairies that were out there, and they would bring maple sugar back as well, and we would cook that on the stove and melt it down and pour it on snow and have some maple candy. So, but that was my grandmother on my mother's side would primarily go to Canada. I don't think anybody else did those pilgrimages.
So let's go back to Vermont for a minute. How did you come to be born in Vermont? How did your parents end up there?
I know, that's interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of people think, oh, you must have been born in Biddeford because that's all they know. So although both my parents were born in Biddeford, my dad's work, so my dad, it goes back to his military service. So he served in the Korean War, and he learned he learned surveying, land surveying and engineering when he was in the war. And actually he was surveying an area with an officer when he took his helmet off, and my dad was hit in the head by a sniper bullet, which caused him to be taken off by helicopters similar to what you see in MASH. My dad would explain he was fully conscious when this was going on, which is really remarkable. He survived the bullet wound. But he did have some hemiparesis that he had to work through. But so that was kind of a big deal, and he received Purple Heart. Well, his time in the military doing that work, when he received his honorable discharge, he ended up working for Lane Construction. And Lane Construction at that time was working on all the interstates that were going in throughout a good part of the United States. And so my dad and mom, when they got married, were moving around a lot, and they moved to wherever Lane Construction was working. So they had a trailer, and if they had to move to Columbus, Ohio, they moved to Columbus, Ohio, and they stayed there until the work was done. And then they would move, they went to Billerica, Mass. They did Columbus, Ohio. Then they moved to Vermont.
So did your family go with your dad on all of these?
So I wasn't born yet when they did most of their traveling, and when they ended up in Vermont, I was born there. My brother Chico was born there, and then they moved to Keysville and Slate Hill, New York. And these were just small kind of towns that, again, interstates were going through. And by the time we moved to Slate Hill, I just started kindergarten. I was 5. And that was at the point where halfway through the year, my parents were like, we're moving back to Biddeford. My dad was offered a job with the street department for the city of Biddeford. So they decided to move to Biddeford. and they bought the house we lived in, where I pretty much grew up on Elm Street. And they had a GI loan and were able to purchase the house there, and that's when we started living in Biddeford.
You know how your parents met?
Yeah, so my mom, although she went to the local schools for a while, she ended up getting rheumatic fever when she was younger, and she had it 2 years in a row, and so she lost a lot of time in school. So my grandparents, fortunately at the time, both of them worked. My grandfather worked at the Saco Lowell. He was a machinist, and my grandmother was a loomer in the mill. So they both worked and could afford to send her to private school. So they sent her to St. Joseph's Academy, which I think was like in Berwick, Maine. It was like in the southern area of Maine. It was a convent where you stayed there. You lived there and went to school there. And the order of nuns were very kind and nice, and my mom enjoyed it. And so she spent a lot of her time there. So she wasn't as well known to my dad. Later on, when she would come back in the summer, she was, again, very interested. She dated a lot of, she was very pretty. And so she had a lot of male suitors. She actually dated, I think, Art Dakota. She went on one date with Art Dakota, and I think she went, I think it was Pete Danton that she may have gone out with before too. But somehow connected and got to see my dad, because at that time my dad was working for York Bottling Company for Sammy Cohen. And my dad used to drive his truck by Birch Street, where my grandparents lived. And my grandparents' front lawn was probably maybe 4 feet by 4 feet. And my mom wanted to catch my dad's eyes, so she would mow the lawn with the little push mower. And my dad kind of caught her. They connected that way, and then got to know each other, and that's pretty much how they met.
Now, did your mother do high school at St. Joseph's also?
No, my mom did, at St. Joseph Academy. So
Yeah.
she wasn't around during
Yeah.
the school year, but in the summer she
Yeah.
would be home and on vacation. So she was kind of like, someone new and interesting. And actually, when my parents were growing up, they sort of lived near each other. My dad lived on Cut Street, and they both kind of lived around on Green Street for a while. They knew, I think, of each other, but didn't really connect until later.
And your dad, did he go all through parochial schools growing
Yeah,
up?
so my dad went through St. Joseph's and went to St. Louis High School. Yeah.
You talked about your dad's military service. What about civic activities? Were your parents involved in civic activities?
My mom was the person who was kind of grounded everything so that my dad could go out and do those civic responsibilities. My dad was a people person. He loved people. He loved being out there. He was very connected politically. He was involved in a whole bunch of organizations, the typical Knights of Columbus, the Elks, the Voltigeur Club, the Rochelieu Club. They used to, even later on, they would call him in to kind of MC, because he knew a bunch of French jokes that he would tell. Just very, just someone that really loved to connect with people. He was a city councilor for, I don't know how many, it had to have been over 15 years or so. He was also boxing commissioner for the state of Maine. He was very active in pretty much anything that was political on the local level as a Democrat. If you had it was funny because John Kerry told me one time, and Dave Kerry said, your dad, if you got Dick Potvin's vote, you were going to be all set. if you were a Democrat. If he agreed that you were going to be that candidate for the Democratic Party, you were going to be all set.
So your dad not only was a joiner, when he joined he was active.
He was active.
So that's where that gene comes from in you, as we'll see a little later when we talk about some of your civic activities. Yeah, and I think the other thing, my dad was really good about crossing party lines. Like he also was, what I would say for both my parents, later in their lives, my dad and Mom bought a store, Potvin's Market at Halfway in Old Orchard Beach. And growing up in that store really allowed me to watch my parents and how they treated other people and really welcomed people regardless of what they looked like, what they sounded like, where they were from. Everyone was welcomed and part of the family. And my dad had friends that were Republicans, had friends, my dad was French Catholic, but had friends who were Greek, who had friends that were Jewish. It didn't matter to him. He saw people as people. And my mom was the same way, very accepting and understanding of differences, and that really was a wonderful attribute to be able to pass along. Yeah, back then, 40s, 50s, 60s, probably even before, Biddeford was primarily Democratic.
Correct.
Did your father ever talk about that, what it was like in almost a one-party city?
Yeah, he did, and I think there were times when there would be Republicans running, and I will say what they had back then too was a slate. They used to call, like, you would have a slate. So if you were going to be on, it was almost Democrats running against Democrats versus Democrats running against Republicans. So depending on whose slate you were on was going to may or may not make you successful at what you do. But we were fortunate to have him also have such deep ties that we had Mondale come to our home for, my dad hosted a kind of like a gathering at their home to welcome Mondale and to bring awareness to his campaign. And also Jimmy Carter, my dad was instrumental in arranging for Jimmy Carter. I remember meeting him at the parish hall, the St. Joseph's Parish Hall, and then my dad was invited to go to the White House for a breakfast with Jimmy Carter and others to thank him for his efforts in helping with the campaign in the area. Yeah, he did. We have a picture of him. It's great. And we have pictures of Mondale and the people coming to our house to meet him. It was kind of a big deal.
And how about siblings? Can you talk about your siblings for a few minutes?
Do I have to, Tom?
You don't have to. I know you have some.
I do, and I have the best brothers. I have two awesome brothers. I have my brother Chico. His everyone says, is that his real name? Like, where did that come from? And his given name is Richard Paul Potvin II. And my dad's nickname, they used to call him Dick Potvin. So they decided to give my brother the nickname of Ricky. My brother hated that name. My dad was a boxer. So my dad, he was a Golden Glove boxer before he went into the military and was drafted. And obviously after his injury, he wasn't able to do boxing any longer. But there was a boxer called Chico Villa. And so I used to call my brother Little Chico. And so that name has stayed, and people call him Mr. Chico, and and he does developing is what he does. And even when he was little, when my dad was working for Lane Construction, my brother wanted to always build. He always had that drive to make things, build things, and he'd have all the construction Tonka toys, and later on would build in the back of our house on Elm Street. There was a little patch of woods, and he and his friends would build tree houses and cabins. So that's where my brother really always had that drive and desire to build things. my brother Jay, he's, I think, 5 years younger than I am. Jay is a really remarkable person. So he was born prematurely, and when he was born, the doctor said that he probably wasn't going to make it, but if anyone could do anything, it was this priest that was known to be able to say prayers that would, and the doctor was Jewish. The doctor's like, I don't know how this works, but all I can tell you, this is the only thing I can offer at this time. So the story is my dad tried to reach the priest at the rectory, but he didn't want to have anything. He was in bed. He didn't want to get up. So my dad went over and pulled him out of bed. And again, we don't know for sure exactly what happened, but the deal was my dad did get the priest to the hospital. There were prayers said, and then my brother started to make improvement in the next couple of days. And so that was kind of a big deal. And now my brother's like taller than my other brother and I, and so we're like, well, God only forbid if you came in on time, you'd be like Jethro Bodine. I don't know, but Jay is great. Jay is funny. He has a great sense of humor. He used to memorize Rodney Dangerfield albums, and my parents used to pull him out of bed at night to come down and tell Rodney Dangerfield jokes to all their friends when they were having cocktails. So Jay works now as for Sodexo. He's a chef with them, and he's been with that company. I think he's probably one of their longest standing employees, and he has kept the tradition of boxing alive in our family. He runs a nonprofit boxing club for young people, and it's about using the art of boxing to enhance people, and to it's not so much about fighting, it's more about the art of boxing and the discipline. And he's helped a lot of young people who really didn't have a direction and needed a father figure. And he's done really, really well with that. And he does that totally as a volunteer.
And where is his club?
Right in Biddeford. It's in the back of where Cowbell is. It's in the back. And he works with young men and women. And if someone is a promising boxer, he will take them to Portland. And he works with Bobby Russo with the Portland Boxing Company. Boxing club. But yeah, he's pretty remarkable. He gives a lot. He works a full day, and then he goes to the gym at night and works with these kids.
Sounds very interesting. Now you talked about having lots of family, grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins. Do you have memories of family gatherings, and were a lot of your relatives, your older relatives, especially French speaking?
Yeah, so pretty much everybody growing up, there was a lot of French being spoken, and a lot of franglais, a little French, a little English. My grandfather spoke on my mom's side spoke English pretty well. My grandmother was pretty broken, but it got better as she, as we came along. It kind of moved her to speak more English more frequently. But there was a lot of French, and we as kids pretty much, we knew some basic things, but really we weren't encouraged to speak it. It was more that you did because you wanted to know what the grown-ups were saying, and that was the drive for learning it. But I look back and I'm really glad that I was exposed to that. And working at my parents' store, we had a lot of tourists that would come. So we had to at least be able to speak or try to understand what they were asking for. So that kind of helped us, develop some, conversation in French. But my brothers and I were not even close to being fluent in French, but my parents were, and obviously their parents were too.
And when and where did you meet Jim O'Neill?
Wow. So your sister had a role in that. So Helene and I we've been friends since that time in high school, and we had a mutual friend, Chris Robinson, who Jim was friends with. And a lot of times Chris would come out with the girls, which were Helene, it was Helene Gerard, Nancy Drapo, Joyce Morissette, and Sandra Bissell, and Karen Foss. At the time, we were a group that hung out together a lot. And Chris was kind of the guy that would show up and hang out with us too. And we would say, Chris, you've got a lot of guy friends. Why don't you, have them? Oh, no, they don't want to have anything to do with you. And then the guys were asking Chris, hey, Chris, don't you have all these girls? Like, why can't you have them come to our party? Oh, no, they're not going to want to have anything to do with you. So somehow Jim ended up going to a party with Chris, and Helene and I were there and our friends. And Jim and I started to talk with each other. And we had not really connected in high school that much before. We really had kind of separate groups that we were in. But I remember seeing him once in the cafeteria and saying, he's kind of a nice looking guy. And he also talked to me. We were doing a homecoming decorations for, back then, the juniors did homecoming decorations for the seniors. So I was helping out. I love to do artwork and all of that. So I was doing some project, and Jim came over and started talking to me, but didn't really think too much of it. But at the party, we really started to talk, and he made me laugh, and I'm like, okay, I need someone to entertain me. So, and he's cute, why not? And we've been together since junior year in high school.
Oh, you stayed together all that time?
Yeah, and how it really solidified was Helene passing me a note in American Studies class saying, do you like Jim O'Neill? Circle yes or no, and I circled yes. So that really was the contract that sealed it.
The admission.
The admission, yeah.
Well, it's a neat story. And how many children do you and Jim have?
We have two, and they are, so I have a daughter now. She identifies as Lauren, and Lauren was born male, and Lauren's name at birth was Jansen. And that transition has been fairly recent, so it's kind of, we're all getting used to it, but Lauren is lovely and has a really kind heart, very smart, and works as a medical assistant and is doing quite well with that. And my youngest is Sean, and Sean also worked at the hospital for a little while, well, actually 3 years in patient access in the emergency department, and now he's looking for a different career. Again, very smart, extremely hilarious. He is really funny. We think we're funny, and then he tops us. So he and kind. So I have two really, really wonderful children.
Yes, you do. And what was it like growing up in Biddeford? What are some of your favorite memories, and what did you do for, excitement?
Yeah. I look back, and again, a lot of people from, our age group, Tom, we really were fortunate. It was a time where you could just go out and, you had to be careful about some things, but overall it was Biddeford. You could wander around almost anywhere you wanted to. You could bike. My parents working in the summer, we would work with them sometimes, and we got to know Old Orchard Beach as well. So we almost had like two homes and two sets of friends, which was kind of neat. But growing up in Biddeford, I think people knew who you were. If they knew who your parents were, that really helped a lot. And you almost had something common with it was like an extended family. Even people you weren't related to, you almost felt like you were related to them. And the ability to just be able to get on your bicycle or to walk to where you could go and do something was just really a wonderful privilege to have that I know a lot of young people don't have today. And we would do things sometimes as neighborhoods, and sometimes you would get along. Like, the nice part of Biddeford was that it was a small town. The bad part about Biddeford, it was a small town. So sometimes, you know, for whatever reason, you had people that were, you know, they want to be your friend and you're welcome wherever. And then another time you show up and someone says, well, I don't like you because of this. And then it all blows over in about 5 minutes and everybody's friends. I mean, it was one of those things where neighborhoods became a little territorial too. So, you know, it's not like a gang, but, you know, all those the people on Green Street and the people on Mason Street. So those were like different sections, but it was a time where you could really be free as a kid to make a lot of choices that were your own choices, and some of them might be good, some of them might not be, but you weren't micromanaged in those choices. And if something didn't go well, your parents were gonna, you know, be there to find out about it because someone's mother was going to tell them, or someone's father was going to tell them. And people kind of basically helped each other in that way. My parents were pretty lenient. I did not have a curfew, and I think they could be lenient because they knew all my friends, they had curfews, so there was no need to impose one on me because I had to come home, but they all had to be home. But I didn't feel like I had strict parents, but they held me accountable. So that was, you know, I felt I was held accountable. I wasn't just allowed to do whatever I wanted to, but it wasn't, I had friends that had a lot more restrictions than I did.
When you were, you know, like pre-high school, did you have boundaries that you had to stay within without telling your parents, or could you go as far as the Mayfield or downtown without telling them?
Wasn't supposed to go to, what was it called, Indian
Cliff?
Indian Cliff, but guess who went one day and stepped in a puddle, and it was obvious that I had to do some explaining when I got home. Yeah.
And did you spend much time at Mayfield in the summer?
I spent a lot of time at Mayfield. Dairy Joy was like a frequent, like probably every day. We were, I think my mom said between my brothers and I, we probably kept that place open.
Was Dairy Joy where it is now, or was it at 5 Points and it was where it is now?
Where it is now, yeah.
And what about downtown Biddeford? When you were like pre-high school, where did you like to go, and where did your parents like to take you? Or,
so when I was younger, they would take us downtown for some shopping, like to Butler's. We would get our shoes there. We had to wear uniforms at St. Joseph's. Sometimes they were mail ordered, or we could get part of the uniforms at Butler's. Nichols, we would go to. My brother would go to Langevins. But that was more of our parents taking us there. There was Murphy's Music Store is the only place I remember going to really, and children's shop. My mom would shop for me there because at that time, even in high school, I was pretty petite, so I could fit into some of the clothing. Even that was probably the nicer clothing shop that was still open at that time. But a lot of times, like in high school, that's when the mall came, and that's where we ended up going to the mall a lot. The downtown was really at the end of its cycle by the time, I got to like junior high and high school.
Did your family go out to eat much in any local restaurants?
Yeah, we used to go to the Wonder Bar a lot. We knew the Dragitas family, and so the Wonder Bar was a place we would go. A lot of our eating out was mostly in Old Orchard Beach because my parents worked there, and we'd go to Charlie's Drive-In. We'd go to some of the other places down there. But my parents liked to go to nice places to eat, and we would go to places in Portland sometimes as well. And I remember going to even the movies at where the Fine Arts, which is not such a fine arts place, but that was the classy movie theater at one time. So yeah,
On
so
Congress Street.
on
in
Congress
Portland.
Street, yeah.
What about classic establishments like Alex Pizza and Riley's Bakery?
So interestingly, Riley's would be a place we would go when we're little, and you hear the story of the kids getting the bags of pastry pieces for like a nickel. We also used to go behind St. Joseph's, where the convent was. They used to prepare hosts, and they were probably punched out, so all the pieces that were left over from the circular hosts were also put into a little bag, and we would get those. That was part of our little downtown trip. Alex Pizza would be more if we went to my Aunt Jean's house. My Aunt Jean was my grandmother's sister, and they were one of the first people to have a built-in swimming pool in Biddeford. They lived on Ray Street, and Jean and Ray were the original owners of Ray's Market. And we used to go swimming there, and once in a while my grandmother we would stay for dinner. My aunt would order Alex Pizza for us. And George's Italians, I remember having my first George's Italians at my grandparents' house on Birch Street, and saying, I don't know what this is, but I know I like it. It was such a different sandwich, because we think about, today we have all kinds of sandwiches on sub rolls and all that, but I had never had a sandwich on a sub roll before, so that was kind of a neat thing. And there weren't a lot of choices for soda at my parents' house. My grandparents' house was ginger ale, and mostly because they could have it with their 7 and 7, what they would call it, so they'd have it with their Canadian Club and ginger, but never had any that kind of stuff until later at my parents' store. And then it was like, oh my goodness, there's 50,000 varieties of soda, chips, and desserts.
And did you go to the movies much when you were growing up?
Yeah, we went to the Central. I never went to City Theater to see a movie, but I did go to the Mutual. We used to go there a lot. And the Central was fun because it was such a big place, and they used to have, sometimes they had like matinees with a clown that would come in at intermission. That was a lot of fun. But yeah, that was something that we would do as well.
And what about winter activities? Did you go sledding, ice skating, any of those things?
Yeah, I was terrible I was a dancer, and everyone would think, boy, you'd be a great ice skater. Oh boy, I was terrible as an ice skater. Really, my ankles were not strong enough, but I loved to go ice skating at St. Louis skating rink, because that was the big hangout. So you would go there, and they had, I swear, 345s, Color My World, Jeremiah Was a Bullfrog, and some other song that they played over and over, American Pie, over and over and over again.
Yeah,
but,
I'm not sure it mattered if you could skate back then, because both Westbrook and St. Louis had nice warm clubhouses. You could just
stay there. Yeah, you kind of go out once around just to say that you that you did it. But I never went to Westbrook skating rink, which is interesting because I live near there now. But that was too far out to go. But St. Louis that was really a lot of fun. We also did sledding. My dad had a snowmobile, so we were fortunate enough to have a backyard that was actually a pretty good sized backyard. We had set it up as a baseball field in the summer, and then in the winter we would ride my dad's snowmobile in the backyard. And sometimes we'd go to Ossipee Lake. Then the lake used to freeze quite considerably, and you could ride a snowmobile on it.
So did you ever sled down Bradbury Street Extension Hill? You lived right around the corner.
Oh yeah, we did. That was one of the things we should not have done. It wasn't necessarily a smart move. Yeah, but yeah, we did. We'd have, as you probably have done, have somebody at the bottom of the hill And
We never did it, but we saw a lot of kids do it, but we were told explicitly not to do it.
Yeah.
We would always go over to Shaw's.
yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
people did that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Rotary Park really didn't happen until a little bit later, but I do remember going there a couple times.
Yeah, that was more mid-70s, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Late 70s?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, What about Catholic grammar school?
hmm
So you had nuns all through the grammar school?
Yeah, so when I went to school in New York, I had started kindergarten there, but I only did a half year, and that was a full day kindergarten. It was actually pretty advanced. And then we moved to Biddeford, and I ended up finishing kindergarten at Emory School, and then started at St. Joseph's School. And St. Joseph's was still in the original location where parish place apartments are now. I was in that school till probably third grade, and then they made the switch over to St. Louis when St. Louis High School closed, and then that became St. Joseph's, which is now St. James. Yep.
And, what was it like to be a young teenager growing up in Biddeford?
When I was in 8th grade, I really had a great class of people. Like, we were the nice part about going to school with the same group of people, I mean, there's like the pros and cons, like I said before, like when you're a small town, when you're in, you're in, when you're out, you're out. It's hard to find, if you don't quite fit in, sometimes it's hard to find your people. But for the most part, that group of people that I went to school with in 8th grade, we were really tight, and a lot of them are very smart, and others were very clever, like went on to do like trades, and just it was just a really, we were very fortunate. And in 8th grade, we didn't have nuns; they were lay teachers, so we were kind of given an opportunity to be more worldly with our conversations than we would have. The nuns, some of them were very nice, some of them were very frustrated individuals, some of them had, they were very strict and not very supportive, but the lay teachers, as they would call them, really allowed us to have some good, solid conversations and prepared us to go on to high school, which I think helped my teen years not to be so sheltered. Mm-hmm. So by the time we got to high school, I was really looking forward to it, because I was really looking for like more of my people. And I found those people. It took a little while, but and I will say again, our class as a whole, I graduated in 1980. So the class of 80, again, good group of people. We had I think we had 320 people in our class. I was just
going to say, going from a small Catholic grammar school to a large high school, and that your age is the tail end of the baby boomers,
yeah.
And those were big classes coming out of Biddeford High School by Maine standards anyway. Most of those classes were 300 plus students.
That's right.
What was that? I mean, what was that transition like?
Right. It wasn't too bad, because we had already, by the time you're in 7th and 8th grade, you're kind of running out of resources like boyfriends. So and everyone's kind of in the same boat. So we kind of crossed over. So back then they had St. Andre's, St. Mary's, and St. Joseph's as the 3 Catholic schools, and then the junior high. So there were occasions at Rollaway Bowling, for example. That was a place where sometimes we would meet up with. I had a boyfriend that went to St. Andre's, and then.
So this is before Jim O'Neill?
This is before Jim. Oh yeah, there were dates before Jim, and Jim had dates before me, but you got to know some of the people in the other, and also cheerleading and doing other sports. You had some opportunity to get to know some of the other people. So it wasn't like you were just coming in to a group of total strangers. You kind of did get to know people. And I guess like anything else, once you start going into classes, you have some of the classmates you've always been with, but then you have new people. But it was good. I really enjoyed my time in high school, and I'm still friends with that group that I mentioned earlier. We call ourselves the Circle of Five, and we still get together, and it feels like time has really not passed when we're together. We've grown, but there's still our personalities are still there, and it's great that we've been able to hold on to those friendships. And I have my friend Nancy Drapo, we've actually been friends since first grade.
Well, that's neat.
So yeah, so we've kept that up. She's kind of like my pesky little sister, so I always...
What activities and/or sports did you participate in high school?
So I went to dance school. I loved dancing. When I was really little, I connected with anything that was a ballerina or any kind of dance. And so I went to Gladys Rubin School of the Dance. And what was great about Gladys is that she took us to Massachusetts and some places so that we could see, like, even though we were good here, there were kids out there that were like way ahead of us. And it exposed us to other types of dance and other things. So I focused on dance a lot, and gymnastics was the closest thing. And when I was in high school to dance, I also was a cheerleader, but I really liked the gymnastics part of it. It was much more physical. I had a lot of energy, and I also loved the fact that gymnastics was one of the only sports where you also were combined with the guys. So we would set up the gym, and we would have both the boys team and the girls team practice together. And it was really good because you had that, you learned how to be friends with, like, and sometimes we dated each other too, but there was something about, you would see people working hard on trying to do, we would root for each other. It was a different dynamic than just doing a sport that was all women. All that. Track is kind of like that too, where it kind of is mixed in. But it definitely made it fun to go to practice because you got to joke around and have fun and socialize, but you also had to do the work that was asked of you, and we had to set up all the equipment for gymnastics, practice, and tear it all down in the same evening. So it was a lot of work, and then go home and do your homework. So I learned a lot about discipline and making sure that you can also have fun, but you have to, you have responsibilities that you need to do.
Did you play a musical instrument?
I played guitar when I was, the nuns actually would teach you if you wanted to learn how to play guitar, and I played guitar in church. And then later on when I met Jim, he was a drummer and started to play guitar, but then I'm realizing, he's like, oh, can I play your guitar? I'm like, sure. And then he's way ahead of me, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not even gonna try. So, but that led to later on me being involved in theater and doing musical theater.
So did you participate in plays, musicals in high school?
Not in high school, nope, not till I went to college.
No.
So,
And
yeah.
you're an accomplished artist, at least by my standards. I mean, where did you pick that up?
From my mom.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
In school, were you...
I took basic art classes. Like, the focus always was, that's the only unfortunate thing is, college prep. This is what you focus on, and the only time I would take an art class if it was an elective. And so I really enjoyed the art class, did well, but it wasn't ever really encouraged. And they had a theater program at high school, but I never, again, being in sports and doing everything else, I didn't really look at that as an option. But when I was younger, Nancy Drapo and I used to do little skits together and do them as part of we had opportunities to do them in front of the class and all that. So got kind of that exposure to performing and doing dance recitals when I was younger. So even though that opportunity didn't really happen in high school, and even the art piece, a lot of that more awareness came up when I went to college.
And what about social events in high school, like dances?
Oh, of
they
course.
a big part of your life? Yeah.
Oh yeah, you got to go to a dance and walk around. Football games, walk around the field, and you're watching a little bit of the game, but you're also meeting up with friends. And but there were parties that we used to go to in high school, like that were in different places. Trying to find things you can do when you're not of drinking age, and so those are always, you've got to get really creative about those. But there were places that we would go to have parties, or the big thing was parents that had basements that were all, like, in the 70s. There was a big trend to deck out your basement and make it like a place that you could play cards or games. Then if someone's parents were nice enough, they might let us have a party down there, and I think they just hoped nothing bad was going on down there.
And you talked about summers at Potvin's Market. Did you have any other summer jobs at all? Or?
I worked for Park and Recs teaching gymnastics. So that was kind of fun to do, because back then, when you were in a sport, you only had that finite time when that sport was in season where you could practice. But with they had Junior Olympics came about, and so in the summer they had lots of summer programs for gymnastics, track and field. Biddeford had a great program that was in place, and so I was able to. They needed someone to teach the little kids, and I loved doing that. That was one of the things that I did in the summer. But pretty much it was that, or working at my parents' store.
So you graduated in 1980,
Mm-hmm.
and then you went on to college. And how did you make that choice? What went into leaving Maine to go away to school?
Yeah, I wanted at the time to be a medical technologist, and Colby Sawyer College had one of the best colleges. I also was interested in going to an all-women's college because at that time, one of the things I was frustrated with is really wanted the quality of the education and the money. Like, I knew my parents would be spending money for me to go to college. I wanted that education to be focused around me as a woman. And what I found, that not that Biddeford High School was discriminatory, but I did feel that there were times when male sports took over as compared to the other sports that were involved with women. So wherever I was putting my money in, I wanted that to go there. And I really liked smaller classes. I found that worked best for me. And that's what Colby Sawyer was able to offer. And they had a dance program. So that was a good choice. And at the time, that was a lot of money for my parents to put into. So that was also a driver for me to, if I went there, I was going to be able to focus, on my work. Also, have fun too. But I knew at that time that's where I wanted to go. Meanwhile, most of my friends wanted to go to Boston schools or to DC, and some went to UMaine as well.
And when you went away, did you feel that growing up in Biddeford and, those experiences, your family experiences, had prepared you well for that?
I think for the most part, yes. I think having like a good group of friends was really important. And back then you had to literally write letters or call somebody on the telephone to communicate with your friends. And knowing that I had that support group, even though we were away, was helpful. What I wasn't prepared for was how wealthy some people were in and how much they got away with they weren't serious about being at school. And that was an eye-opener for me. I had not experienced that before, because I think we all, in Biddeford, we kind of all came from, even though some had a little bit more money than others, the people that we were around didn't have the kind of money that I saw when I was in college, and the expectations of that. Like, if I got a card with $5 in it from my mom, I thought that I had hit the jackpot. Meanwhile, I had people I went to school with that were upset with their parents because they didn't deposit the $2,000 that they're used to having every month, which, so that for me was, that was something that was like, wow, that's a whole different life.
So let's talk about post-college experiences and post-marriage experiences. And if nothing else, I think both you and your husband Jim certainly would be described as entrepreneurs. And certainly you, I'm not as familiar with Jim in terms of civic responsibilities, but I mean, I couldn't go through the whole list. We'd be here the rest of the night. We would be, but I mean, you owned a small business. You used to do some catering. Your husband has a business that he still runs. Plus, he's an accomplished professional musician, and he still practices music. You were very involved in the city theater and the restoration project there and everything. And anybody that's listened to the interview on city theater saw a lot of you and what was going on there. You were the Biddeford Clerk of the Works. I didn't know that. You worked at St. Andre's. You worked at Southern Maine Health Care for quite a while, and actually made a career transition in healthcare the last couple of years. So I don't know where to begin, but I will ask you, how did you and Jim decide to operate a small business on your own? How did you get to that? Because you two were very young, and that's a brave decision.
It was, but when you have nothing to lose, you have nothing to lose, right? So yeah, how that came about is when I graduated college, my first professional job was with the WIC program, which is the Women, Infants, and Children's program, and I really enjoyed doing that work. But Jim at that time was still working. He had started to work for my parents, and so he really liked the business aspect of the store. I kind of went away from it a little bit, thinking that maybe I want to, again, I understood being self-employed, the pros and cons of that, and also wanting to utilize some of what I acquired in college, feeling that I needed to have a professional type of career. But it became very clear to both Jim and I that we really liked doing our own thing. Like, we liked calling our own shots. And there was an opportunity. My parents weren't really ready to sell their business yet. It got kind of close. We thought maybe we would have an opportunity to buy the store, but the former Roy's Garage was somewhat renovated, and Dick Gagne and the Coravos, they were in-laws, bought it, and it was really becoming clear that that it wasn't what they wanted to do anymore, and the area was growing.
Yeah. Just to be clear, that Roy's was at the intersection of Main and South Street.
That's correct.
Yeah, so that anybody that might not be familiar
Right.
with
So
knows
Roy's
that
Garage was
yeah.
where I think there was some gasoline being sold, and perhaps
It was a Shell service station.
it was yes,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then they converted it into a convenience store, and that's when Rotary Park is right there. Parkview Court was there, but they were starting to build Cathedral Oaks and Village Lane. And the construction was going on, and they were getting really busy, much busier than I think they ever anticipated, which was a perfect opportunity. Jim somehow saw the ad for it going up for sale and we ended up buying it. We ended up we didn't have very much money, but Jim's dad he co-signed the loan. So I was, I think, just 23 or 24, and Jim was 24 when we bought it. But we had tons of experience. We had relationships with all the vendors. It was also at a time right before a lot of change in banking went through, where your name and your family's, the connections did make a difference, and valued the experience that you had. Even though we were young, we had probably more experience than most people starting a new business. So that's how we started, and it didn't take long before we outgrew the space and we needed to make an addition, and then we ended up making an addition for ourselves upstairs to live there and work there, and that actually worked out really, really well, and we did that for, I think, 19 years. We sold it in 2005.
So positive experience overall.
Yeah, and we got to know so many people in the community, and we became close to, like, anyone in public works, the fire department, the school system, the people that lived in the neighborhood that worked. I think we're a place where, the other thing, we're very mindful of the quality of what we offered. It was really important, and my science background made me realize how important, like, cleanliness is, and before that even became a thing, I was very careful about cross-contamination and all of that, and also the quality of what we offered at a very reasonable price, because we want people to keep coming in every day. And I think that formula worked well. And even when I got jobs later in life at the hospital, people say, "Oh, I remember you. You're Jim and Renee." Not just Renee, you're Jim and Renee.
And did Jim start his current business while you were doing that?
Yes, how he developed his software, which is JPOS software, was based on a need that we had for our store. So we knew that computerized, or they call them point of sale systems, were just starting to come out, and that would make our business so much easier, and especially with invoicing and everything else that was becoming much more complicated. We looked for programs, but they were way too expensive at the time. So Jim had a friend who worked for IBM, and he lived with us for a little while, and he gave Jim an old IBM laptop, which was a new laptop at the time, and Jim basically learned how to do code and taught himself how to program, and developed our own POS system that he now sells to customers. So it's kind of a nice segue into what he does today.
And what about your experience at the City Theater?
That was a wonderful experience. My dad helped make that connection, because when I came out of college, I was dancing at Ram Island Dance Center and Casco Bay Movers in Portland, but there wasn't an outlet for dance locally the way I was dancing. The classes I was taking, it was getting to be frustrating, because I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to be able to do with my dance skills. So my dad said, "Well, how about City Theater? They've got a show called West Side Story." And I said, "That sounds great." And I auditioned and got in and started with the theater. But actually started sooner than that. I had done an internship with Maine Opera for 2 summers at City Theater, but it wasn't at that time. In the summer, they would rent it to the opera company. It was called Maine Opera. So I worked as an assistant business manager, and then also choreographed Carmen for them as well. And so that was a very interesting relationship that I had with the theater. I also, when I was working on the opera side, there was a gentleman, his last name is Barassa, and he collected old black and white film, and he lived at Biddeford Pool, and he wanted to create a theater in his basement, and City Theater had all these odds and ends for seats. So I needed money for books, and so I volunteered to take 18 seats, have them, my dad found a place that would powder coat them, It was an automobile guy that hung up the seats and spray painted, and I spent my summer reupholstering them and picking the gum off of them. And we had somebody, I think Hardy Banfield, installed them in the basement of Mr. Barassa's basement. So he had City Theater seats in his basement, and I got invited to a big hoity-toity party with the president of Shell Oil and some other big wigs there, and it was great. And he paid for my books and then some. So that theater was like a springboard for me. And later I performed at City Theater and then became the business manager of City Theater and then worked on the restoration. And that's how it got tied into the Clerk of the Works, because at the time they didn't have anyone doing any facility work, and they needed someone to come in to help with some repairs. So I just, again, segued into that.
Yeah, and I would encourage anybody listening to this, if you haven't seen the City Theater interview and tour, to look at, because there's a lot more in-depth information about the history of that Renee led that tour, and it's very, very interesting. How do you see that building, the City Theater, City Hall, and everything? What's the importance of downtown Biddeford?
I think it's an anchor. The City Hall, right now, I am so pleased that they received grant money to repair the clock tower. It's not restoring it back to exactly what it looked like, but it's definitely going to be quite stunning and beautiful. And the best part is the integrity of it will, hopefully last for many, many years to come. And it really is the centerpiece of the downtown. And City Theater, when the downtown was struggling, City Theater was one of the few places that managed to still bring people to the downtown area. And it was a way for, I think, people to piggyback off of, to use as like an arts, like it's one of the first like art centers for the community. And now, we've got, look at what's happening downtown. So it was great, because I think you've got the government and you've got the art piece kind of coming together in one building, and it still having a lot of the historic flavor that it had in its original, and that people care enough to preserve the stained glass that's there, to care enough to preserve the colors and the woodwork as much as we can, and still use it. The public can come in. It doesn't belong to a private person. It belongs to the community, and I think that's really special and important.
So you're of the age that you still can remember the thriving downtown Biddeford.
Yep.
And you mentioned the beginning and the end of what we knew growing up,
right,
with the main mall opening and the strip malls opening and everything, and then you saw this down period of Biddeford, and now you're witnessing the upswing of that. I mean, what are your impressions of all of that and the history, and how do you feel about it? And where are we going with downtown Biddeford?
Yeah, I think it's great. I do remember, again, being a creative thinker, when the mills, people go back in time and say, oh, the good old days. Boy, it's hard for them, even with the successes that are happening downtown. Some people are still caught up in what it was like when they were growing up. But if they were to go back now, it wouldn't be the same. There's something about being in that time, in that place, only knowing what you know. I mean, there was a time in Biddeford, you had the spillover from the tannery. It smelled like burning boots. Then we had, Maine Energy, and it smelled like rotting cheese. It's just, those are the things that sometimes we romanticize a little bit and don't remember how difficult it was. I think that those memories are important, and Biddeford has always been special, even when it wasn't the place to go for shopping anymore and the mall took away. There were still people that had something interesting happening downstairs, like the natural food store, for example, Riley's Bakery, Alex Pizza, George's Italian. There's still some milestone places cornerstone places, I would say, that remained. And there's some people that would try, like they could see, like there could be a renaissance to bring it up, and they would try it and would kind of catch, but that flame didn't really, it would go out because we had an issue with the economy or whatever. The best thing that ever happened is we didn't go through urban renewal, so being quiet for a while actually helped us preserve some of the integrity, and having the mall out there also helped preserve the integrity of our downtown, because it could have been where many of the buildings could have been raised in order to build, box stores. And I think Biddeford's planning on that. Bob Dodge was a big influencer in that as the city economic developer, knowing that we needed industrial parks, that we needed we needed different places to have these things, and that our downtown would be a special place. And I remember saying, it won't work until people live down here. And people said, well, where are they going to live? I said, they're going to live in the mills. And people thought I was nuts. I said, no, because you could develop that to, if people live down here, they'll shop down here. And now people are living in our mills. And so I think this is great. I think there will also be some challenges with, sometimes, we worry about gentrification, or the arts bring in all of this interest in a place that nobody wanted to look at. The arts come in, they fix it up, they make it fun, people want to come, and then you push them out, is what usually you see. My hope is that won't happen, that we will always have a mindfulness of that, but it's hard to say, because a lot of these are public. They're not public spaces, they're privately owned, and we need them to continue to invest. But I hope that in the places that are public, that they stay protected.
What, if any, influence do you think UNE will have on downtown Biddeford?
I think it's already had an influence, and I think further back, there was a time when they would tell the kids, don't go downtown Biddeford, and kids would come anyway because they just will, and they have had a big influence. The challenge will be to see what happens. The med school is now transferring over to Portland, and now the business school is going to be going. So there'll still be students available at UNE. I'm not aware of how much they actually have contributed to the downtown monetarily, but I think having the students, that helps. And the bus line, now there's a bus line that will go back and forth, and I think that was a really smart move. And having, if you have and also I think it's good for the college to have a vibrant downtown where the parents can come to and the kids can go to when it's a great campus, but there's an extension of that campus, and that's our community.
And I have to ask you about this job, the Biddeford Clerk of the Works. How did you end up there, and actually, what does the Clerk of the Works do?
Yeah, I didn't know what a Clerk of the Works was until one of the counselors, I think it was Pete Lamontang, may have at the time provided that title. But my work at City Theater with the restoration, I was basically the general contractor for all that work. The City Hall had, as I described in detail with the tour of the City Hall, there was water damage that had occurred with a water tank letting go, and it just literally rained through the City Hall into the city clerk's office. And at the time, they didn't have a facilities person. They had Paul Gani that would help out, but they didn't have anyone overseeing anything. So I basically inserted myself as a volunteer to help guide them through that process. And then it became clear that they needed to hire me because of the responsibilities involved. So they had to give me a title, and they called me the Clerk of the Works. And so I was helping them arrange for the contractors to come in. Jerry LaPierre and some other people, and Jim Godbout, was very helpful in that. But there were other projects that were city-based, and now they have I believe they hired Phil Radding, and I don't know who's doing it now, but they do have a person that oversees the facility. But yep, that was the the fun name that I got at that time.
So Renee, so how do you end up going, you got this civic responsibility position, end up in healthcare and going to work down at St. Andre's?
Yeah, so when my parents both deteriorated at the same time and in different ways. My dad had progressive dementia, and then my mom had a lot of medical challenges. She was a dialysis patient, and we were in and out of hospital settings and also in and out of different skilled nursing facilities. And when I went to college, although I didn't become a medical technologist, I kept up with my medical. I graduated with a medical studies degree and a degree in bachelor's degree in fine arts. But I had intermittently jobs in the medical field. So I worked with WIC doing that kind of work, and also worked for Planned Parenthood as it was kind of like a medical assistant role. But being involved with my parents' care drove me back to healthcare. And so both of them ended up at St. Andre's for long-term care. And I was also on the board of St. Andre's at the time, and there was a position open for their admissions and marketing. And my work with marketing with City Theater, as well as my background, although I'm not a nurse, I can read medical documents and I have a very good understanding of medical terminology. It was a good fit, and I became their admissions director and really enjoyed my time at St. Andre's, a very special place. For people that may not realize, St. Andre's used to be basically it's called a home for unwed mothers, where people would bring their daughters or relatives who were pregnant, and the sisters would look after them. They would go to school there, they would have their babies, and the babies would be given up for adoption. So there are several people in the community. I have actually 2 friends I grew up with that were adopted at St. Andre's, and the sisters that did that work were very protective of the information. And there's a lot of history. That would be a really great segment to talk to somebody about St. Andre's and how they managed what the nuns did. It was amazing what they did and how they did it. And then it became a skilled nursing facility later on. And Covenant Health System is now the owner.
When did the home for unwed mothers close? Do you even know?
I'm going to say it probably, it must have been like in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a need for it. Like the stigma wasn't there anymore. But I think it was probably around that time.
And we talked offline about this. You're not really sure which order of nuns was operating the facility when it was the unwed mother's home.
Yeah, I know they usually put the call out what happened. There were 2 priests, the DeCary brothers, that were very influential of what they did at St. Francis College, also for setting up St. Andre's. They were kind of like the go-between the diocese, like in Canada, as well as in Maine, and also looking for need, like where was the need and how they were going to meet the need. And the need at the time, especially with the textile mill and also others in the area, there were lots of challenges with young women and families not wanting to. It was, again, they were shunned. The families were shunned, the young women were shunned, so this was a nice way to be able to provide privacy, and then the babies were being born and adopted. So that was
Which was a good thing.
is a very
Yeah.
good thing. And again, you know, I don't pretend to know what it was like during that time and how they were treated. I never heard of treatment being poor. If anything, I heard it was very supportive. I do know that they changed the names of the young women that were there. In some cases, like when it was first founded, they even had a little farm in the back. And so the young women that were there also helped out and received schooling as well. Yeah,
An interesting part of it, of its history, that's for sure.
it is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It's actually pretty special if you
Yeah.
think about it. Yeah.
And then after St. Andre's, you come to work for Southern Maine Health Care.
Actually, I had a little stint in Falmouth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Falmouth Foreside so I worked for First Atlantic, which is another company that is a for-profit. St. Andrews was a non-for-profit, but they do skilled nursing, and I got to work in the world of assisted living as well as long-term care, and I worked there for a couple of years. And from there, I came to Southern Maine Health Care, working in patient experience. They needed help, especially in the emergency department, and so I came in to work with the families and with the staff to try to get people to understand, you know, why are they waiting so long? Is there anything we can do to help explain? Looking for ways to, even though there might be nothing we can do about waiting times, you know, sometimes just patience, knowing what it felt like to be a family member and knowing what it felt like to see people that needed help really, I think, allowed me to be a good go-between the staff and the families and the patients.
And local organizations, too many to mention, that you've been on. But one that I would like you to talk a little bit about, and then any others that you would like to, is the Heart of Biddeford. You were one of the founding persons, and you're also on the board there. And
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about Heart of Biddeford?
Yeah, so
And
that
what
was.
it is and what it means to you?
Oh yeah, it was one of those nice spin-offs from City Theater. So we had City Theater, kind of, as we would call it, the heart of the arts, because that's really what was there at the time. And then recognizing David Flood was also very involved, and there were downtown development groups, a lot of groups very involved in the downtown, all doing great work. But there was a Main Street Maine program that, if we were able to meet the criteria for it, would really provide a template and also what we would need to help grow that initiative. And so that's part of the Maine Preservation group. It's a really well organized, and actually they had excellent results at that time. If you became part of a Main Street Maine program, it was going to really benefit your downtown. So we hired our first director, Rachel Harkness, and she is this young woman coming in, and she was wonderful. She was the right person to bring in. So City Theater actually covered part of the nonprofit piece until they could get their 501c3. So when you're getting donations or anything like that, you need to be able to filter them through an existing 501c3, and until they can get it, then you bring it back. So that's how we got tied in very closely, and working with a great group of people. And the group continues to evolve and change. Now I am just an advisory member. I am at a point where, you know, if someone say whatever happened back then, what did we do, or what do you have for advisement? To be honest, they're doing such a great job. Delilah is the current executive director. She's amazing, and she's been a consistent presence, and they're just growing and are really the foundation for the downtown. They've done great, and really glad to be a part of that. And there have been other spin-offs from that as well, like Engine, Tammy Ackerman, wonderful person, lots of, coming into our community and starting a real awareness of art and design. And so lucky to be on that front end. But there were people before me that kind of had those visions, like the Carbonides did. There were other people that, Cynthia Howard was an architect that was very involved in the downtown, but Heart of Biddeford, for whatever reason, it really took and has remained. Yeah.
Any of the other organizations that you're part of that you want to talk about, or at the risk of leaving some out?
Yeah, no, I just would say, like right now, the Wardwell is, I've been on their board and I serve, there's 2 presidents. I'm one of the presidents of Wardwell. I'm very proud to be a part of that organization. They are amazing and do really great work taking care of people who have been in our communities.
A lot of benefit people.
Yeah, and they do great work, and I'm really proud to be a part of that organization. And I would say I'm on the policy committee for the city of Biddeford. I think I've been on that for 14, 15 years. I've lost count, but I'm happy to serve the community on that committee. They're, again, a good group of people that I work with that really care about, we don't have a lot, we're advisory, we don't have a lot of power, but we are able to put things together and have the opportunity to hear from the public without a full-out public hearing, to kind of get an idea of, what we're bringing to the council.
Usually we like to have people tell us memory of certain events. You may be too young to not remember any of these events, but your parents wouldn't have been, and it's just interesting to see what they might have shared with their children. Did your father ever share anything in detail about his experience in the military besides the major event of him being wounded?
Yeah, I think, well, one of the things, I think meeting people from different parts of the country was a kind of interesting thing for him, because again, growing up in Biddeford, he talked about you only, like in Biddeford there was only one family of color at the time, and so then going into the military and meeting people for different races and ethnicities and having to work alongside with them wasn't something that he was afraid of. He actually would talk about what that felt like. He also boxed before he had his injury in the military, so he was able to bring some of that over. And he kept some memorabilia from his stint in Korea, like he had a little spade shovel in his uniform, and some of the medals that he had in his Purple Heart we still have. So those were kinds of the things that he tried to paint that was a very, I think for most men that were in the military and the women that also served, I can't imagine how impactful that time was. And with, you have no control, you're being told to be here in a totally different, world, and now you're going to a totally different country and being asked to do things that you grow up being told you're not supposed to do, but you're doing this service. I can't even begin. I don't think we had any inkling of, when those stories were being told, how significant, and even with my father's injury, we had no idea how significant that event really was until much later, when other people reported back what my dad was like and what he did and how much he persevered. That's very impactful.
What about the mill closings? I mean, in the 50s, it's when it really hit hard, but there have been others since then.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I remember being little, and certain times downtown they'd have a police officer directing traffic because there was so much traffic going on. And I remember walking with my grandfather to I think it was Doyen's Pharmacy to get an ice cream and seeing the people, at different shifts coming in
that
and
was,
out.
For those that don't recognize Doyle's, it was on the corner of Maine and Hill.
Right. Yeah, that was his place to go. He'd get his bromo seltzer and and a coffee. But I do remember people in high school would occasionally get jobs at the mill, and they were considered really good paying jobs as compared to what you could earn for your age. And I do remember as a young adult being invited to go to, there was a group for Biddeford Textile that would meet, and I think Paul, I can't remember his name. There was somebody that would bring people from the community to talk about the community, and then when you were done, they were so sweet, they would give you a Velux blanket to take home, right? And but I remember when it was closing, I knew it was significant to the people that lived in our community. A lot of people thought, oh good, the mills are gone now, but others, that was their livelihood. And so it was good to know that I had the background to understand what people sacrificed in those buildings. I can't even imagine what it was like to work there, and that people did, and they took great pride in what they did. I remember going to the mill outlet store that was right to the left of Nichols in that brick building, and they used to have all the sheet goods and some small imperfections, but even then the quality of what came out of there was quite significant. And just understanding in a short period of time what happened with the Industrial Revolution, and seeing how Biddeford benefited from that. But it also, when you have that one thing and it goes, then that's why you need multiple things, and that's why we're probably going to be in a better place moving forward, because we don't have all our so-called eggs in one basket.
That's a good point. Did your parents talk at all about the forest fire of 1947 that hit close to Biddeford, and the fires in Biddeford in 1963, the Hooper Street fire, the Grafton lumber fire, and also the top of St. Mary's School had a fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my parents weren't living here during that time period in '63. That's when they were living in Columbus, Ohio. I think they would live there in this 1960 and 61. But of course, my grandparents were still local, and they, people loved to talk about fires, and those were like big events. They were sad that they were happening, but at the same time, they were pretty spectacular events for people. But I remember my dad talking about the fire of 47. Was it 47? Is that correct? That it came almost up to where we lived, but for whatever reason it would finally stopped, and how significant it was and how much was lost. Yeah.
Yeah, it was certainly a major event.
Yep.
So, you've walked us through a good part of the history of Biddeford that you're familiar with, and what do you think the current perception of Biddeford is now?
I think there's two sides of opinion. Some people really like the growth that's happening and are appreciative of the efforts that are happening to make Biddeford a destination. There are other people that are being critical about the things that unfortunately always have been a part of communities, with people who are unhoused, people who are coming here as our new set of citizens, new Mainers, I think what we forget is like when people are talking about, well, like we've got all these people coming in and we can't take care of our own, and they like Biddeford was built on immigrants. When when the Irish came, they certainly weren't happy about French people coming because they were worried about their jobs. It's about fear. It's about the worry that someone's going to take over. We're at a point where especially in the service industry, we don't have enough people. Like the good news are a lot of people, like the goal was to be able to go to college, get better paying jobs. But with that, a lot of young people now aren't doing service industry type jobs, and we need people to come and help us with those jobs. And we need people to also we need nurses, we need teachers, we need police officers, and we just don't have enough people. So having people come from other communities is not a bad thing for people to come want to live here. The challenge is, do we have enough resources to help support them so that they can do the work that they want to do? So some people, I think, live in a bit of fear of what does that mean to me, because it's changing. Literally, the color of Biddeford is changing. The age group of Biddeford is changing. I think we're still the youngest community in the state. Our average age, the last time I looked at the numbers, I think it was like 38 years old is the average age.
The youngest population in the oldest state. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
It is interesting. And so, that dynamic could change. But I really think there's some thoughtfulness. There's so many things that are much better even though we think about the old, there's some things that are much better, and some things we long for that were maybe better before in our community. But you can't go backwards. You have to go forward, and I think that one of the next big things are the children in this community and how we're supporting them, and with the schools. The technology has changed. How we use schools today is so different. In a lot of our schools, we think of them as new. They're not new. When we go back, they've actually been there for a while, and that's like the next big, I think, thing that people are going to worry about, like the expense that it takes. And that's the other thing. We are a community that people want lots of things in their community, but that does come at a cost. So it's getting more expensive, to live here.
Yeah. And you've walked us through the contrast of certainly downtown Biddeford. How important is it, in your opinion, to have a vibrant downtown, or is that even necessary anymore?
Some people won't think it's necessary. Yeah. Personally, I think it's important to have, and out of pride. I mean, you have this beautiful architecture. You keep the memories alive, even though the mills are not going. We have a museum to honor that. We have a city hall to honor the people who felt like this was an important place to go to. If we don't have that, I guess, I don't know what you would do with it. It would fall into disrepair. And also the more energy you have, and if it's positive, it brings more positive to that. Now, there'll be things that will come and go. There'll be things that will stay. Things are going to continue to evolve. It happens everywhere. You can't stand still in time. But my hope is that things stay accessible and that it doesn't get to a point where we start losing that special, there's like Biddeford has a little grit to it, as people say. And I think that's what makes it so appealing.
So how has your life turned out so far compared to how you envisioned it would be when you were younger?
That's a great question. I don't know. I'm someone I like change, and I don't fear change. So I don't think I ever really had a picture of what my future was truly going to be. I kind of would set my sights or my goals more in the adapting to what's going on in the moment and what are the best opportunities in that moment. I don't really have a bucket list, so and I know I try to. That's where I think my husband and I get along so well, is that we are so grateful for what we have. And I will say my parents were kind of like that too. There was always like being grateful for what we have, and not always looking for that next shiny thing, but also expanding ourselves, not being afraid to try something. And even though I think I'm one of those people, I don't have a degree in that, but I know how to do that, like getting the knowledge, like what do I have to know to be able to do that. And I think I'm really happy about where I am today, and all the ups, downs, twists and turns that came around. I learned so much, and I think that's part of what it is. I just absorb what's around me, and I like to fix things and make them better, and also help people see their value. That's the other thing, is like someone may say, well, I don't think they know what they're talking about. I'm like, well, let me listen a little bit more. I think they might have something to say. Or do they even know how important they are? That's why I think everybody has a purpose, everybody has value. And that's the other thing I feel I learned from my parents. And even if someone's different and sees it in a different way, sometimes you can figure out how to communicate with them. And you don't have to agree with them, but you can honor what they're saying and maybe learn from it.
Mm-hmm. And what is something you would want to make sure that people take away from hearing your story?
I think I would say there is something to being involved in your community. If you're going to have an opinion about something, that's okay, but there's a lot of energy that you put into an opinion, so you might as well put that energy into action. And you may not get the results that you think you want, but you might get results that need to happen, or you at least call attention to it. And you meet a lot of people along the way that you may connect with for other things. Like your connections might not, like you may end up making a connection somewhere that takes you on another path. I think the piece that I really would like people to take away from is, don't have the fear of getting to know people who are different from you or situations that are different from yours. Get to know what those are, because you can benefit greatly from them. And that, I think, is where I feel really good about the parts of my life that I've been able to do that. And also treasuring friendships and people, like not writing people off, like giving people a chance to be who they are and accept them for who they are, and not try to pigeonhole people either. Like, let them grow and meet them where they're at. I think that those are things that will not only help others, but they really help fulfill you. But I think giving of yourself to projects and different things will help come back and be very fulfilling.
It's worked for you.
It has, but I had good role models for that, and I think I wasn't even thinking about it being a job. It just was what you do.
And is there anything else you would like to share that we didn't discuss?
I would like to share that the work that you and Nicole are doing with capturing these stories is so important and meaningful. And it's hard to do these interviews. I mean, I think back, I would love to re-say everything I said at the beginning, because I'm realizing some of it's tangential and it's all over the place, but it's real. It's what it is for now. There's so much things that I could say when I leave here that I wish I had said, but it doesn't matter. You're capturing the essence of someone's stories, and I think that's really valuable. And I want you to know how much I know the public appreciates it, and it's something that, when people will go away. People die, and their stories, if they're not continually told, those will die too. But the stories I told were from my dad and my mom and my grandparents, and I don't know if my children will have that same experience. It's different.
No, but at some point they can listen to your story, and I've said to other people, it's not even so much your children, it's your grandchildren, grandnieces, nephews.
Yep.
That will learn a lot about their family history by listening to some of these, and they're not intended to be a formal interview.
Right.
Try to keep them informal. And Nicole, besides doing the interviews, she's the one that does all the transcription and gets these all set up on the website and everything. So I mean, she is really the main workhorse on this project. So very fortunate to have her leading this, and I feel fortunate to work with her and to be doing this.
Well, and I want to, and thank you for considering my story, and I've enjoyed listening to the other stories and reading the transcripts as well. So thank you for your work.
Yeah, and so on behalf of the Biddeford Cultural and Heritage Center, we thank you for sharing your story with us today, Renee.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.